All right, we are live. MythVision podcast. I'm your host, Derek Lambert. I have Rabbi Tovia Singer joining us again today. And when we first started this entire series and said, look, let's do this live stream, he immediately set 2 dates up with me because he said in the first one, there's no way I'm going to be able to cover all there is to disclose or to reveal about what's going on in the Apostle Paul's writings that is terrible or bad, that is clearly working against what the religion we call Judaism is, the scriptures of the Hebrew Bible. And he is highlighting things that I find are interesting. And I'm hoping that you, the viewer, can tune in, ask questions, and learn something. Try your best to understand where he's coming from, because he has a keen perception that I typically wouldn't have, and most people who are probably reading this literature who come from a Christian background wouldn't be able to pay attention to. So with that being said, without further ado, Rabbi Tovia Singer, welcome back to MythVision, my friend.
Oh, man, so good to be here. How long has it been already?
1 minute.
Since you've been a Jew? 1 minute? Okay, brilliant. What did I say? I didn't. We're not on live, are we?
Dude, we're live. We are
live.
I
didn't mean what I just said. So his conversion to Judaism should not in any way influence MythVision, and you're subscribing and supporting it. I am so sorry, Derek. I did not want.
What is there to be sorry about? You haven't said anything.
I didn't want to talk about your conversion to Judaism
on
air, and you asked me not to. It's really my apologies to you. He's an atheist, and you have nothing to worry about. So just keep.
Right.
The gig is working. Go ahead.
You know, Toby, I love the humor, and you're always bringing that. Look, people just don't know. Even in our private conversations, he can't go without being humorous, and this is just the way he is. In Israel, when we went down to the Wailing Wall, the whole nine. You are just like you are online in real life. I just want to say something I thought about last night as we were approaching this live stream. I was thinking about you because, I can't stop thinking about you. And I said, I like to find common ground with you. We have things we disagree with, which everybody on planet Earth does, except my wife. I agree with everything my wife ever says because, that's how the world works. But as far as what interests me is, if you look at Christian apologetics, this is to kick it off. Let's kick it off with a fun start. Christian apologetics, I've noticed over the years, want to position the New Testament literature in a purely Jewish-only framework. And I feel like much of the work of the academics behind MythVision have exposed the more Hellenistic, the Greco-Roman infusion into maybe some Jewish concepts, but then some even raw, pure, what they would call pagan. It's almost like a taboo or a cootie. I can't have my Christian religion touch the pagan stuff. It has to only come from Jewish antecedents. And while it is in many ways, I feel like you and me have a common ground on seeing that pagan aspect of much of the New Testament literature. Do you agree or disagree?
Yeah, people, I think, very quickly picked up that, Christianity is not just a sect of Judaism, but Paul creates a completely different religion out of the Jewish faith, and just using a very superficial thumbnail of Judaism. And Paul is the most influential figure, the most important convert to Christianity. And his influence, people usually think of just the amount of contribution he made to the Christian Bible. 13 letters are attributed to him. Another letter was believed by the church fathers to be written by him. Second Peter is there to support. I mean, his influence is staggering. What people don't realize is he was really pulling from Athens. He was pulling from the Greco-Roman world, not from the Jewish world. It was a very different world, and Jewish people can pick this up very quickly. I'll just this very quick point. I was lecturing in Fairfax, Virginia, which is basically a suburb of America's capital, lecturing at a temple, and I met a fellow there who works in Washington for the Secret Service. He doesn't protect the president, but he protects the currency of the United States. He trains agents in Washington how to detect counterfeit currency. And I asked him, you probably have an amazing collection of counterfeit currency confiscated over the years. New agents learn all the stuff that's been done to. And he said, Rabbi, stop. That's not the way we train our agents here. He said, what we do is we want the agents to touch real money. It's printed on a material. There is nothing like it in the world. There are fine line engravings on the U.S. currency and shifting watermarks. And the agents have to study real money. What happens then if you dare put a counterfeit in their hands, they will recognize it immediately. This is very critical in what we're going to be doing on air today. And that is, once you know the real thing, once you have a familiarity with the Jewish faith, the moment you crack open Paul, the moment you open up the Gospels, you immediately recognize that you're looking at a counterfeit. You're looking at an illegitimate accretion of the Jewish faith. And for those of you who are evangelicals, all you have to do is open up the Book of Mormon, and you pick up what the problem was with the Church of Latter-day Saints, and you pick up what's wrong with Vatican, with Rome. So that's how it is with the Jew. We're looking at a text that's putatively an outgrowth of the Jewish faith, but we can immediately pick this stuff up. So that's a good point.
It's an interesting observation. I hope our audience can journey with us on. And I'd like to dive into examples. What better way than to begin with some things last week when we did our live, you gave us a few examples and we dove into those. We dealt with Romans chapter 9, mid-verse. He cuts off quoting something from scripture, which talks about you can do the law, but Paul's emphasis over and over is that we can't, no one can, and yet Christ can for you. So this new thing, this mystery being revealed as you describe, Paul's new Christ type gospel, that he fulfilled the law, which I have so many questions about where that idea comes from. Like purely, I'd be interested in finding the antecedent to this notion that you can't do it. Is this from a Greek and Roman source? Does this go back to something else? What is Paul? Where's Paul picking up this idea?
It's dualism. In the ancient world, this is something that you're going to get from every scholar that talks about religion. And that is, in the ancient world, the people looked up at the sky and they saw utter perfection. They saw the planets, the celestial bodies. They knew what they were looking at. They understood it. Today, that art is lost. In contrast, they looked around them and they saw suffering, pain, and death, and broken bodies and broken wheels. And they imagined this world as being created by a god, a deity, but an inferior deity, a demiurge, rather than the great god of the planets. And that drove home the message to everyone that you can't do it. You're nothing. I mean, you're a sinner. There's nothing you can do to make yourself right by the one who created all those planets. And therefore you need an intermediary. You need this is not a book that any of us think that Paul actually wrote. But in First Timothy, Paul says there's one God and one mediator between man and God, and that's the man Jesus Christ. So I'm not sure, but I doubt that Paul wrote the pastoral epistles, as most people do. But it is Pauline. Paul would have agreed with that, because that's the theme. You can't do it. And we talked about Romans chapter 10, but Romans chapter 10 is not in the vacuum. That's the message right throughout Romans. Romans is the last indisputed letter of Paul. It's also the most influential epistle of Paul, because if you can do it, just think about this for a moment. If there's something you can do to make yourself right by God, then what do you need Jesus for? That would be like me selling you a fifth wheel. It means there has to be a reason why you need Jesus. If I can pray to God, confess my sins, and God will forgive me, then what do I need Jesus for? What do I need Mary for? And Jesus, Mary, the saints, all those are placing yourself between you and God the Father. And that's something that the Hebrew Bible opposes. Moses got very nervous when the Jews said, we really can't bear to hear the voice of God. Why don't you tell us what God is saying in Exodus chapter 20 after the 10 Commandments? So, and this didn't turn out well when the Jews wanted a golden calf. So that's what Paul is doing at every turn. You can't do it. You can't make it, which resonates with people whose self-esteem isn't strong.
Now we need to get into some textual stuff. Let's get biblical, as you titled your volume 1 and volume 2 of your books. And I'm interested in hearing, again, other red flags in Paul's literature, or even if you feel like that's a narrow space, because many scholars point out Pauline influence in the Gospels. What sticks out to you, again, that isn't just saying, here's a small, slight spinoff of a Hellenistic Jew, but it almost, to you, screams much more of a malicious or even more intentional anti-Judaism spin. Just so for our audience, if you don't mind, Rabbi, just to make the point, emphasizing the question, is many people in the academic world will say Paul's intention, they're trying to read his mind, wasn't in a malicious one. It was a bit of a replacement theology, but he didn't intend to usurp all of Israel's identity in this new creation or in the body of Christ. He didn't realize what was going to happen with his theology. Some scholars think that the 2nd century church fathers took that football, so to speak, the pigskin, and ran the remainder 100 yards, rather than what Paul was doing was just initiating something, and then the door flung open beyond his control and his initial intention. So they interpreted him beyond his original understanding. I'm curious to know what your take is on Paul and diving into this as we go.
I know many of the New Testament scholars you have on, and we've had our conversations, and that's usually where we divide. And that is that it is malicious, and Paul knows exactly what he's doing. He's very deliberately blaming the Jews for Jesus's crucifixion. So on the one hand, Christ crucified is preached by Paul. Paul insists that if the Jews had understood the mystery, they would have never had Jesus crucified. And this is mind-blowing. So we're going to just deal with indisputed letters. So that's 1 Corinthians 2, verse 7 and 8. But let's take an epistle that's even older than 1 Corinthians, and almost as surely the oldest surviving Christian literature, 1 Thessalonians. No one questions whether Paul wrote that epistle. And he says in 1 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 14 through 16, even as they of the Jews who both killed the Lord Jesus Christ and their own prophets are contrary to all mankind, and forbidding us to speak to the Gentiles. That's mind-blowing. And this is the kind of stuff that anti-Semites, that the Westbury Baptist Church in their protests in front of synagogues, they have 1 Thessalonians up, that passage. So Paul, on the one hand, is talking about preaching Christ crucified. Paul, on the one hand, is laying out the theology that would do so much damage to the Jewish faith. And he's also preaching that the Jews are uniquely responsible for committing the unimaginable act of deicide. I say this to you. You talk about church fathers spreading anti-Semitism. I disagree. The church fathers were just reading the Christian Bible. They were reading Christian literature rationally, reasonably. And Melito, an early church father, Jerome, a bit later, they all read this stuff and went, all right, we hate the Jews. And they all said the most obnoxious things about the Jewish people. And they were very rational. So Paul is spreading the notion, is peddling in Jew hatred, is peddling in the notion that Jews are responsible for killing God. And then on the other hand, he's saying that that had to happen, and Jews didn't understand what he's doing. So to the Jew, he came as a Jew. To those who are not under the law, he came as someone who's not under the law. He's completely chameleon. And then someone asks the question, is Paul, did he mean well? He meant what? So, of course, he didn't mean it. He was a malevolent character, and his influence had an astonishing effect, not just on Marcion, a second century Christian thinker who was anti-Jewish, but the proto-Orthodox, Ignatius, Irenaeus, I mean, I don't need to name them. So they were very rational. I don't blame church fathers for hating us. Of course they hate us. They read this kind of discreet, any rational person would draw the same conclusion.
If I may press back just a little to play devil's advocate, imagining reading in Romans, the letter to the Romans, where he says stuff like, if I could be cut off for the sake of my kinsmen according to the flesh, like he sounds like he's pleading, like if we were in an in-group, out-group, suppose Paul's arguing with other groups of Jews who've rejected his Christ. They see him as a stumbling block. They're not able to accept what Paul's saying, that he is remorseful in wishing they would get it. Is it possible that we're pushing it too far and thinking it's all malevolent rather than misinterpreting his intentions? He thinks he's doing the right thing, even if those on the outside are saying, no, what you're doing is destroying this and causing more hate toward us, because there's this in-group fighting between two different groups of people, whether they're Christ follower Torah worshiper, or not worshipers, but Torah following Jews, versus him pushing his non-Torah form. If you get what I'm trying to say, is he, like, is it possible to give him a little bit of lax and say, hey, he thinks he's not doing this harm, but he is arguing with other Jewish groups?
Right. So the question is, why do bigots speak differently in front of different audiences? The answer is, what letter are we talking about? Exactly. You mentioned the book of Romans. Who are the recipients for the book of Romans? An audience he has never met. When he wrote the book of Romans in the late 50s, Paul had not yet visited Rome. Who is in Rome to receive his letter? We know, because he addresses them, Jews and non-Jews. Therefore, we would expect, anticipate, that in the book of Romans, Paul is going to be very careful about what he says. Why? Because Jews are listening. In fact, he addresses them Jews in Romans chapter 7. So, of course, in Romans chapter 3, verse 2, Paul is going to say the kind of thing that the oracles of God were given to the Jews. Of course, he's going to say all those sweet things when he's speaking to a mixed crowd. But when he's writing to other groups, when he's writing to Galatians, or we're talking about the Thessalonians, well, First Thessalonians wasn't written to a Jewish crowd at all. So there he can be unguarded. He can spew. And it's what we see. You could see these alt-right people, when they're being interviewed in the major media, they're going, we're not that. But when they speak to their own people, the bigotry. So therefore, that's what's happening. Romans, Paul is very careful about, do you think I'm really against the law? Am I against it? No, heaven forbids. And you can have chapters in Romans, like chapter 11, where people will interpret it to mean that Paul's rejecting replacement theology. But that's Romans. That's because who he's writing it to. Incidentally, these titles of the books, these letters, are titles because of who the audience is. This was the fashion at the time that Paul was using. So, right, when he's speaking in First Thessalonians, he's writing to an audience. He didn't have to worry that Jews would be listening. When he's writing to Rome, he knew Jews were listening. He had to be very careful about what he said. That explains the whole deal. He's speaking to two audiences. That's why Paul's going to play games with Hosea. I mean, you in Romans chapter 9, verse 25, Paul's going to say that even though the Gentiles shouldn't be chosen, but there's a prophecy: those who are not my people will be called my people. He's totally misquoting the book of Hosea, the last passages of Hosea chapter 2. I mean, that's just another example of this insanity. So Hosea is living in the northern kingdom, lived at the same time as Isaiah, Assyrian Empire, and Hosea in chapter 1 married a prostitute. He's told to name his children according to the pending doom of the northern kingdom of Israel, who are going to be set to be carried off by the Assyrian Empire. And so what the names that he's ordered to give his kids is, one of them is, "You're not my people, lo ami." In chapter 2 of Hosea, there's a prophecy that one day the 10 lost tribes will be restored, and those who are not my people will be called my people, children of the living God. Paul completely misappropriates that in Romans chapter 9 and says that's referring to Gentiles. Even a perfunctory reading of Hosea, it's really not complicated. You know that who Hosea is speaking about. He's not speaking about who Paul says he's speaking about. So there's just an example of how Paul misappropriates the Hebrew Bible. But I will say this: you don't want to depend on me. You can read the stuff for yourself. Just read the text, look up the footnotes, look up the cross-reference.
So this is an interesting point. I want to just highlight the work of Jason Staples, but also the non-academic ideas that float around there, that Paul, and I say non-academic because there's the closest you can get is Jason Staples in the field of New Testament studies. And that is, there are people out there who suggest Paul might be actually trying to identify his Gentiles as lost Israelites in some way. So you might have Josephus think they're beyond the Euphrates, the 10 tribes, innumerable in count. There seems to be this well-established idea or motif that they're out there and we're going to regather them. And I agree with you, but that Paul is actually misappropriating this scripture, applying it to these non-Jews. And why I disagree with this position, but based on meaning that they're actually Israelites, is that if these were really Israelites, and Paul thought they were, he wouldn't have told them not to participate in Torah. They're freaking Israelites. That would have been the norm. That would have been like, hey man, come back in. This is what you do. This was what we were given. So I'm not convinced or persuaded that necessarily Paul thinks that his Gentiles, his audience, are actually lost northern Israelites in some way, or any other version you might want to craft. There are Judahites that apostatized or something. There are people out there who think that. So I just wanted to make that clarification because I've engaged with groups who think that online for a while now.
Right. Paul doesn't think that at all, and Paul's view is that the law is only a shadow, and the essence is Christ. Paul makes the case not that you don't have to keep the law because you're non-Jews and the law only applies to Jews. That's not Paul's view at all. In fact, in a passage that's so famous, 1 Corinthians 9:20-22, Paul says that to those who are under law, I become as one who's under law. When Paul is Jewish, even though I'm not under the law. So Paul does not view the law as something that intrinsically has to be kept, but rather it's only a shadow. The essence is Christ. So that's not Paul's view at all. Paul's view is that no one has to keep ritual law, not the moral law. And he is misappropriating the book of Hosea. That's referring to the 10 northern tribes. He doesn't think he's talking to 10 northern tribes. He's rather explaining why Gentiles should be in it. Moreover, Paul in Romans chapter 7, who he addresses to Jews, and he says so, his brethren, he says that they don't have to keep the law at all, using a widow as a metaphor. Widows are not obligated to maintain the vows of their marriage. Paul totally opposes the keeping of the law, and that's why it exploded. That's why Christianity succeeded. How did it become a world religion? Because you gave people Judaism, in essence, without circumcision, without keeping the commandments, and bingo, I'm in. Where do I sign up? It was brilliant.
Are there any other examples you could think of that stick out to you?
Well, this is very critical, his misuse of faith. Look, every time you speak to a Christian and the issue of faith comes up, you have to have faith, Paul completely misuses that. And this comes up in all of his letters. Faith means the following, Derek. You're on the road in the middle of the night, at 4 o'clock in the morning, your car breaks down. You call me up. It's not a great neighborhood. And you ask me, I'm in a bad situation. Okay. Could you come and, could you get me? Because my car won't start. This is a bad neighborhood. You don't have faith that I exist. You have faith that I'll come to me. And I say, okay, Derek, I'm in my car, in my pajamas, and I'm going to come get you. So that's what faith is. Faith is trust. It does not mean you don't have to keep the law anymore. That comes up constantly. It's a complete misappropriation of a very beautiful word, a misappropriation of Habakkuk chapter 2, verse 4. Faith in Tanakh does not mean that you believe in God or you don't have to keep the ritual laws. Faith means that you trust that God will keep his promise. There's no greater misappropriation than that. All the other things are just a side issue. The Habakkuk chapter 2 cross-reference that to Romans chapter 1:17, Galatians 3. This is all over, everywhere is this misappropriation of this very attractive word called faith.
And we've long known at MythVision that hell, or even the afterlife kind of ideas that we find in Christianity and in the New Testament, it starts popping up, that these ideas are absent from Hebrew scripture. And so I'd like to ask you, pertaining to salvation, it's my understanding that the word salvation, if you're diving into the Hebrew Bible, it often is an earthly situation, typically in a real life or death, or I need food, or whatever might be, like what we on a day-to-day experience. And what happens in the New Testament is becomes salvific and some soteriological, I guess what we would call a doctrine of salvation, rather than like a real life scenario. Do you see any, I guess you'd say, manipulations there or discrepancies that you'd like to highlight about salvation?
Derek, you and I are going to invent a religion because we want to make a lot of money, and there's a ton of money in religion, a ton. You're not sure? Look at these prosperity preachers and look at the suits they wear and the shirts. I mean, right. So we're going to make up a religion, you and me, okay, and we're going to spread it around. We're going to make a fortune on this, okay. What are we going to tell people? We're not going to tell people that we are going to control the weather, that there's going to be a hurricane. We're not going to tell them that your armies will lose on the battlefield, because we can't control that. What are you and I going to do? I'm Moses, you're my Joshua, you're my right-hand man. We're inventing a religion. Well, what we have to do is threaten them that they're going to go to hell if they don't listen to us, and they'll go to heaven, eternal paradise, if you listen to us. Why? Because it's unfalsifiable, untestable. What is Leviticus 26 trying to do? Famous chapter, the blessings and the curses. God is saying that, listen to me, I'm going to show you the right way. But when the text in Leviticus wants to threaten you, it doesn't tell you about heaven and hell. You're exactly correct, Eric. The text says that it's just going to stop raining if you turn away from it. And if it stops raining, you're not going to have anything to eat. Your cattle's going to die. Your wives are going to stop having children. You're going to lose on the battlefield. So this is so simple. People make a big deal about this. If you're inventing a religion and you know that God has nothing to do with it, you're always going to threaten the biggest fear people have: what happens after you die. You're going to always threaten them with heaven and hell. You're not going to do what the 5 books of Moses does in Leviticus 26 and Deuteronomy 28 and other similar chapters. You're not going to say that you're going to lose when you go to battle, because Derek and Tovia do not control history. So that's why Tanakh is very inclined to say, look, this is what's going to happen. You're going to be exiled 70 years. You're going to return back. You'll be exiled again for a very long time, and eventually you'll come back. These are highly falsifiable threats. So that's what the Torah is. It's not the Tanakh is not interested in heaven and hell. It's just not interested in threatening it. There are very few references to the resurrection. They're there, but they're not a threat, never a threat. The threat is something that you could see. I mean, people who smoke, do drugs, there are effects that people, I'm dying, I gotta quit drinking. Why? Because you don't have to wait till your liver gives out. People could see the symptoms during their lives and just turn away from whatever it is. So that's why Tanakh is not interested in the afterlife.
And if I may add just this one thing before we get to questions, because people here always have deep questions. And if we don't start now, you know how it is. You like to be thorough and make sure you answer people's questions. And of course, I don't want to abuse your time here on MythVision. So I appreciate that. The one comment I'd make, I'm doing a documentary right now on demons or daemons, showing how this shows up in the New Testament. And what I love to do, Rabbi, is I like to lay out Christianity in the time and the cultural historical milieu in which it arises and compare it with other salvation cults, with other stories of people who heal the blind, heal the lame, the deaf, the crippled, raise the dead. And then now I'm doing one on demons to show Jesus is not the only guy in town out here casting out demons in a Greco-Roman context. And there's also Jewish literature that discusses some of this. But I say all that to say, to me, the New Testament is a product of its time, that you can find the elements around in the air, around in the Greco-Roman cults of the day, and also in many of the well-established mythos heroes, I'll call them philosophers and such, that did many of the deeds you see that look similar. I'm not trying to claim zeitgeist like the Xerox copy, identical prints or anything. They're all different, every one of them. But this Jesus character in the Gospels picks up all of this. And I think Paul's already laying a blueprint for that in his letters that he's writing to non-Jews. And so I think we can find a lot of that, which might help us to answer where these things come from.
Just one comment. The Christian Bible goes so far with devils and demons and Satan that there's an interesting cross-reference between Mark and Luke, where the Jews accuse Jesus of actually being possessed by a devil. In Mark, Jesus simply responds to that, but Luke 11:19, which is a cross-reference, Luke adds a piece, and that is, what are you talking about? Satan, that there's a devil in me. Don't your own sons, don't your own judges, don't you Jews also cast out demons? So that's a very interesting commentary that the author of Luke is saying, if casting out the devil is a sign that you have a devil in you, how do you explain that you Jews are able to cast out devils? A very unique source that differs sharply from the other. So this is a very interesting topic.
Thank you. Thank you. Let's get to super chats here. I do appreciate your time and always enjoy learning from you, getting your perspectives. Aubrey Zil, thank you for being here again and super chatting us. Paul, correct. God resorted to rebirth because law wasn't working. Ezekiel 36, 26, 27. I will give you a new heart and put a new spirit in you. I will put my spirit in you and move you to follow my decrees. So I think they're saying Paul's correct, I imagine.
That's the point. That text is found not only in Ezekiel 36, but it's also in Ezekiel 11. That means I'm going to give you a heart of flesh, take out the heart of stone, and what will be the result? Look also Ezekiel 37, verse 24 and 25. And you will keep my laws and my statutes. I mean, I don't know why the church misses this. So these are messianic chapters and the messianic age. All the Jews are going to keep the Torah, keep the commandments. And how do Christians look at these sects, like the one just quoted here, and ignore that the messianic picture is like there was just a Super Bowl, right? And the big discussion before the Super Bowl, who's going to win? By the way, I don't follow sports. I don't even know who was in it, but it was a big deal, I'm sure. But once the Super Bowl is over, you know who won, you know who lost. So the text in Ezekiel 36 you quoted from says that you will keep my statutes and my laws. Yet the church says Jesus fulfilled the law for you. You don't have to keep them anymore. And it blows my mind away that people just see the part of the heart of flesh, not the heart of stone, but fail to see the consequences of that. So bingo, there you go. Look at these texts. Look at the text in Ezekiel 37, 36, Ezekiel 11. They're going to keep the Torah. I hope they hear that at Dallas Theological Seminary, at Moody Bible Institute, and in the Vatican.
Thank you. Thank you. Ben West, thank you for the super chat. Dr. Brown says Isaiah 53 refers to the Messiah. Radak wrote 42 talks about the Messiah. Can't be Israel because of their sin. How do you refute this? What does 53:5 mean? By his stripes we are healed. Or we were healed, sorry.
Always ask the question, who is speaking? And if you don't know who is speaking in the 53rd chapter, you don't have a chance of understanding these passages. The first 8 passages of Isaiah 83 is a soliloquy announced by the Gentile kings of nations, where they conclude that Jewish suffering is not for what they originally thought, because of they suffered as a result because they denied our gods or whatever, but rather it's 2 things. Jewish suffering causes us to repent, to return back to God. By his stripes we were healed. By his stripes we were healed. I mean, who is the servant? You are my witnesses, declares the Lord, my servant who I've chosen. Isaiah 43, verse 10. Number 2 is Isaiah 53, verse 8. Mi pesha ami nagalamo. For the transgressions of my people, they were stricken. That's mind-blowing. They were stricken. Plural. And the church just changes it. Plural. Lamo means to them. It blows my mind away. But I want you to know this. If you are a Christian and wish to stay in the church, don't read the chapters that introduce Isaiah 53. If you want to remain in good standing in your church and not be thrown out, don't read Isaiah 41 through 52. And then you just keep going to church. If you read it in context, you have no problem about it. And it blows my mind away also that Christian apologists will quote rabbis routinely if they think it can help them, but condemn these rabbis as not the word of God, and they don't believe in the oral law. So they're dealing in a world of unequal weights and measurements. I never would do that. I would never quote the Talmud to prove to you why you shouldn't be a Christian. That's silly. So that's it. Look, as soon as you hear any Christian quoting Talmudic literature to defend Christianity, that's a red flag. That means run, not walk, run for your life. That's a scam. So good point. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Aubrey Van Zil again. Paul correct. Servant in Isaiah 52:53 dies to pay for our sin, stated 10 times. 53:8 that he was cut off from the land of the living for the wrongdoing of my people to whom the blow was due.
So you didn't read it right. Where is the word payment? I mean, you do find the idea that Jesus paid the price in Paul's letters, but let's translate it. Mi pesha ami. This is the last 4 Hebrew words of Isaiah 3. Mi pesha ami negalamo. Do you speak Hebrew? For the transgressions of my people, they were stricken. They were stricken. Now, what happened is you change it, just like why in Isaiah 48 is the word lamo translated correctly but incorrectly in 53. And again, just keep relying on your King James, your New International Version, and you will remain in the church. Keep quoting from the Talmud, keep quoting from the Radak out of context. That's exactly how you stay in the church. Exactly.
Thank you. Thank you. You are laying out the blueprint on how to stay in the church today.
Right. Don't read any of the context. Just keep quoting from the Talmud and all these other things. Just do that, and you'll stay in the church. That's exactly what you need to do.
Thank you. Thank you. Masora, thank you for the super chat. What's the silent abomination told in Daniel many times? Is the temple for Jupiter that Hadrian built, Christianity in general, or something yet to come?
Daniel views many kingdoms that seek to destroy Israel. I mean, in Daniel chapter 7 alone, we have 4 kingdoms, one after the other, that seek to destroy the Jewish people. The ultimate, the final, most destructive of all the kingdoms is Edom, Rome, the 4th beast, the 10 horns, and the 11th horn, the little horn. Daniel chapter 11 in Jewish tradition, that's a direct reference to the church, who would not be fond of the beauty of a woman, the celibacy, rejecting the laws and the times found in Daniel chapter 17. What would emerge that would reject the Jewish calendar? That's what happened in the Council of Nicaea. And I think if I asked your viewers what happened in the Council of Nicaea, every one of you would know that the church adopted the doctrine of the Trinity as orthodoxy. The very few people wouldn't know that it was at that same council that the church would reject the Jewish calendar and assign Easter to a solar calendar. So rejecting the law, rejecting the time. So that's the great abomination, the great enemy of the Jewish people. We have whole books in the Hebrew Bible devoted to describing the destruction of Edom, the final implacable foe of Israel. Good question.
Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate the super chat. Aubrey Zil again. Paul correct. Servant rises from dead. Dead Sea Scroll 53:11. He will see light and be satisfied. Light idiom for life. See Job 33:28. He has redeemed my soul from going to the pit, and my life shall see the light.
So all I would encourage, I mean, you quoted Isaiah 53:11. Whoever you are, thank you. That's the point. What does the text say? How will the servant vindicate the just from any? The text says, Bidato yatzik sadik avdi l'rabim. Really carefully, Bidato, what is das? By his knowledge, my servant will vindicate the just for many. By his knowledge. It doesn't say bidamo. It doesn't say by his blood. By his knowledge, right? The Jewish people are a light to the nations. I just say this. Instead of going to Pastor Google and copying and pasting, forget that. I mean, don't you want to be free of these shackles? Don't you want to break free of, I mean, don't you want to get out of prison? So in order to do that, just go, you know what? Forget Pastor Google or Rabbi Google. Just go to Rabbi Isaiah. And the text, Isaiah 53, verse 9 through 12, the last four passages, God is speaking, and he's explaining by what means is the servant. It's the second message of mention of the servant in these 15 passages. The servant will vindicate the just for many, not by his blood, not by the cross, not by Calvary, but by his knowledge, a light to the nations. Just pay attention to that. So look at the text, take a deep breath, and find your way into the mind of Isaiah. It'll help.
Thank you. Thank you. 100 1001000. That's the name. Was it common for Second Temple Jewish interpretations to be a little out there? How odd would less straightforward interpretations be, i.e. Paul be? Sorry, by i.e. Paul be. So did you get the question, or did you want me to repeat it?
I just would say this. So I think I'm going to rephrase what he's asking. And I'm taking a liberty here, but I kind of could sniff this out, and it's a very fair question. I think the question essentially, isn't there an idea that you can have a homily on the text that's not the plain meaning of the text? Isn't that something that could be found in Judaism? And the answer is absolutely. But 2 points. Ein mikra yotze ela midei pshuto. A text can never depart from its, you know the translation called the pshita. What does that mean? Well, you've heard of the pshita. Well, that's one simple word, which means pshat. It's simple, plain meaning. A homily can't do violence to the plain, simple meaning of the text. So, you couldn't say, that God would restore the Jewish people from Jeremiah chapter 29, verse 10, and ultimately be another restoration, but the other restoration is spelled out very clearly in Hosea chapter 3, verse 4 and 5. So you can't do violence to it. Number two is just a careful point. There's a difference between a homily and apologetics. And this people can blur this line repeatedly. Homily is, a speech you make from the pulpit, but apologetics, where I want to convince you of something, you can only use material that you and I agree on. I I mean, imagine a Mormon trying to convince you to join the Church of the Latter-day Saints. And he says, well, why? And he says, well, look at the Book of Mormon. You'd go, well, that's not persuasive because you don't agree on those texts. So it's very important that in apologetics, you look at the plain meaning. The Book of Romans is an apologetic work, and it's misappropriating the text and doing violence to the plain meaning of the text. And that's deeply problematic.
I think you hit the nail on the head as well last week when you brought up Platonism and how influential Platonic philosophy was at this time, especially by these authors, because even the church fathers start to do to their own texts in a very spiritual manner, not the plain reading, and they start to misappropriate their own literature due to their more ascetic ways of philosophy. So eventually you have guys like Augustine coming in going, well, the book of Revelation, no. This is all symbolic. It completely is there's no actual meaning to what's being said here. In many ways, it's very spiritual. And they start to futurize a lot of these books that actually intended to have late first century, early second century significance. And I find it ironic that that kind of philosophy creeps in to both Jewish thought as well as Christian thought at the time, meaning Paul.
The claim of the church is that there are 365 prophecies in the Old Testament that clearly speak about Jesus. Does that sound familiar to you, Derek? Right? That's the claim. I'm not strawmanning this. The claim is not in the Talmud. The claim is that there are explicit prophecies in the Old Testament that all point to Jesus, and therefore you should get baptized. And then we look at these proofs, and what we find is 365 scandals. And then we do the arithmetic. 365 times 0, you know the rest of it. That's why these are not persuasive. What we're doing, the church is making a fantastic claim. Doesn't mean it isn't true, but fantastic claims require reasonable evidence. When we look up this evidence, we not only don't find what the claim is, what was advertised, it's scandalous. You can't then go, well, there were Second Temple Jews that came up with homilies that didn't. That's not the point. You're selling me on this. If Amazon would ship you something that you didn't order, but charge, you'd send it back immediately and complain. Send it back.
Thank you so much. Rick Mueller, how did the pagans view Judaism? Was it seen as exotic, therefore novel, and more interesting than the old-fashioned Greco-Roman pantheon?
So you're asking about how did the pagans? Obviously, it varied. The word pagan just means people who didn't live in the city, lived in the suburbs. So I don't know what period you're referring to, but in the Greco-Roman world, I think that generally speaking, that Judaism enjoyed a lot of respect certainly in the Roman Empire. In the ancient world, they knew that Alexander the Great, who they revered, had a relationship with the Jews. They knew the Jews were a people of antiquity. They really appreciated that. And they didn't appreciate the emperors of Rome frequently. And they saw in Judaism something completely novel and unique. And the anti-Semitism that you see about you that is not what was in the empire. The Jews went to war with Rome over issues like taxes and so on. So I think your question you're asking is very, very broad. I think that in the Roman Empire there was a general respect for the Jews. Incidentally, Judaism was a licit religion. Jews did not have to bring sacrifices to the gods as non-Jews were required to. They were off the hook. They had a dispensation. And that's why, in truth, although the church fathers did not appreciate the Jews, the ante-Nicene church fathers, it didn't matter what Ignatius or Irenaeus said about Jews because they had no power. It was just rhetorical. After Constantine's conversion to Christianity in the 4th century, And after the church becomes a licit religion, and by the end of the 4th century, the official religion of the empire, so then the Jews were in a lot of trouble, because then what was said by the end of the 5th century, the 4th century, I don't know, it could be half of the empire was Christian, perhaps, I don't know, it was large. Now the Jews are in a lot of trouble. So earlier on in the 1st century, I think the Jews were viewed, we don't have a lot of literature on this, but it seems that the Jews were viewed rather positively.
And I imagine the context of who's authoring or writing at the time, because I know there were polemics that were going on. But yeah, I think there were sympathizers for sure, meaning they were attracted to the way. And oftentimes you had these people we call God-fearers, a category that's inscribed on synagogues and such, of those who were non-Jews
Sure.
finding attraction to this religion. And it wasn't like, I'm not going to say that there weren't possibly historically some people trying to proselytize, but it was not the modus operandi of this particular religion to go around and seek converts. There is a jab in the Gospels, whether that's historical or not, of Pharisees doing something like that. Maybe not. Hard for me to trust, but it could be. But there's not that agenda to proselytize like you find deeply embedded in Christianity.
The issue that sophisticated thinkers would have had with Judaism is, how could you possibly believe in the physical resurrection of the dead? That was a big one. Cicero's 6th volume of the Republic, where he goes off on this. What are you talking about? No one in the ancient world thought that. Like, who would want to return back to your wretched body? And Socrates happily drank the hemlock, knowing that he would be soon rid of his physical body. That's why Christianity is the first one to incorporate their demigod resurrects from the dead rather than ascends. Everyone ascends, but Christianity is going to go hard on this because it really does have to synchronize Judaism with Christianity. So it's not good enough for Jesus just to ascend. And even Paul's iteration, where he does not mention an empty tomb, that's not good enough. And we're going to see in the Gospels where Jesus physically resurrects, not so much in Mark, because we don't have an encounter in the authentic Mark with the disciples, but certainly Matthew, certainly in Luke, and certainly in John, we need to push this point. Jesus, the physical resurrection, touches flesh, doubting Thomas. So that's why Christianity is alone in having its God resurrecting from the dead rather than ascending like Romulus did, as an example.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Aubrey Van Zil's back again. Isaiah 49. I checked context very carefully. Servant as remnant doesn't fit, because then the remnant must save the remnant. Only fit is God's firstborn son. See Isaiah 9:6. For a child will be born to us.
Right. So as it turns out, we don't have those words. And Isaiah 49 distinguishes the servant. What's the difference between the servant and the rest of Israel? Just think about that. What's the difference between, what does a servant even mean? Avdi, my servant, right? So servant doesn't mean every Jew. Doesn't mean whatever, whoever, fill in the blank, whatever your favorite Jew is. It means those who are loyal to God. Isaiah 49 verse 6. Let's stay with the passage. What is the role of the servant? The servant is the righteous remnant of the Jews, those who are loyal. What do they have to do? Lahokim eshifte Yaakov. They have to restore the tribes of Jacob. And go to the end of the verse. I'm using the verse you're picking, and to be an Or Lagoyim. So let's figure this out. The remnant of the Jews who are loyal to God rather than the rest of the Jews have two mandates. Mandate number one is they must bring back the rest of the Jews who are lost. Doesn't mean just the 10 tribes. It means the Jews who are not that religious, who are not committed to the faith. Number one. Number two is the Gentiles. So this is an argument that Christians always make. How could Israel save Israel? It doesn't say that. What it says is that the servant means the remnant has to bring back the rest of the Jews. Two has to bring back the Gentiles. And that argument is made frequently, all the time. Israel can't save Israel, therefore it must be speaking about Christ. Nonsense. It's the remnant please, I mean, I want to keep these answers short. Read Zephaniah 3:12 through 16. If you read Zephaniah 3:12 through 16, you'll get it all there, because that prophet who lived maybe 2 centuries after Isaiah described as vividly as possible. So good point. Isaiah 49:6, exactly correct.
Thank you so much. Adam Green asks, is James and Paul teach version of a Noahide laws, Acts 15?
Acts 15. Yes. I mean, I don't know that Acts 15 is historical. I don't think it is the way it's framed. But yes, that's what's in view in Acts 15. What's in view there, for the audience not familiar with, this is a very important chapter, is Gentiles are joining this new religion. Whatever. They're believing in Jesus. The word Christianity does not appear in the Christian Bible. So the question is, if you're a Gentile and you want to become, let's use this today. Let's say you're a non-Jew and you want to become God forgive me, a Hasidic Jew. Well, you do have to convert to Judaism if you want to become a Hasidic Jew, right? Of course you do. So the question is, if you want to join the group of believers in Jesus and to be a Christian, we're going to just use that term. What do you have to convert to Judaism? Meaning, do you have to be circumcised and keep the commandments? And Acts 15 is an ecumenical council where the leaders of the church, all the important people are there, and they agree upon that, yes, you're right, you nailed it, that you have to keep the Noahide laws. You have in there the prohibition against eating strangled meat, which is very interesting. And in Acts 15, you have the prohibition of eating flesh of an animal that was sacrificed to idols, which is forbidden to a Noahide. Now, why is that interesting? And I'll bet many people in the chat room could tell me why this is very interesting, that in Acts 15, it is resolved that it's forbidden for non-Jews to eat from meat of an animal offered to the gods. But why should that strike you as strange? It should strike you as very strange. 1 Corinthians 8. That's exactly what comes up. And Paul says there, we had this conversation earlier. Paul is speaking in one book this way and another book that way. Bingo. Paul goes, yeah, you could eat that, because that was the question that came up. Can you eat the flesh of an animal offered to idol? Paul says, look, the idol doesn't mean anything. Of course you can. What about Acts 15? Well, Paul never saw Acts 15. That's why it's authentic. Although this is obviously an issue in the early church. So yes, what they have in view is Noahide laws. That's what's resolved, and Paul pays no attention to it.
Thank you so much. Aubrey Van Zil, Paul correct. The flames coming down on Pentecost was the third temple inauguration. God now lives in people, fulfilling Zechariah 6:11 through 15, also predicting name of Messiah as Joshua or Yeshua became Jesus.
I really encourage you to read Zechariah. The person who's Yeshua is not Jesus. It's the nephew of Ezra. His name is Yehoshua ben Yehotzadok. He was one of 2 people that led the return of the Jewish people from the Babylonian exile. So, yeah, there are quite a number of people in Tanakh with the name Yehoshua. Yeshua would be a truncated version of it. But Yehoshua was the son of Yehotzadok. Who is Yehotzadok? I mean, look, I just ask you to stop with Rabbi Google. Really, just read these chapters for yourself. Yehotzadok was the brother of Ezra, who accompanies Zerubbabel in rebuilding the Second Temple. This is very plain. It's right there in the text. And moreover, Zechariah envisions a time of peace and restoration, which didn't happen in times of Jesus. But no, it's not. Just because someone shares the name, that doesn't mean every person with the name Yehoshua in Tanakh is Jesus. So I strongly encourage you to to look at those texts, surely.
And just one interesting comment, if you don't mind, and maybe you want to comment on this or not, is the idea that that Pentecost was the third temple inauguration.
Oh,
That's
no.
quite an interesting statement to make, in my opinion. I've never heard even Christians try to say that was that temple inauguration. But it's very weird that you had, according to the timeline of the text, I personally take Acts and put it in the 2nd century. The temple's gone already. But according to the story, the temple's literally still standing in Jerusalem. So I know that doesn't matter when you make up an unfalsifiable temple being a body of people that's spiritual you can't see with naked eyes. But it just is kind of odd to me.
I'll add just something into this mix. Like, this is one of those where you don't know where to begin. So in Ezekiel 41 through the end of the book, the final third Messianic temple comes into view. I'd encourage people to read it because we have the unused blueprints of the final temple, right? That's going to be built not far from where I live. 44 verse 9, very specifically describing that temple, no one who is uncircumcised of the heart or the flesh will be able to enter into that sanctuary. I don't know if you heard that. No one, please, and I beg people, look it up for yourself. No one who is uncircumcised, both of the heart and the flesh, will be able to enter into that sanctuary. Well, as it turns out, Christianity says that circumcision is unnecessary, and Paul warns people that if you really insist on circumcision, why don't you just cut the whole thing off in Galatians chapter 5, verse 12. So there's nothing you really, I encourage you to look it up for yourself. There's nothing magic here. Like, the texts I'm discussing with you are accessible to everyone. It's not like the ancient world was hard to get your hands on a book. You could look it up. Look it up for yourself.
Thank you so much. I'm going to ask this super chat, Rabbi, and then I need to use the restroom if that's all right, briefly.
Sure.
Jonathan Stein, Rabbi, given modern archaeology, considering the fact that we find Yahweh and El in Babylonian and other pagan traditions, why shouldn't I be an atheist? And I'll be right back, Rabbi.
Right. So we would expect to find the name Al in all the religions throughout the Levant and beyond, Baal and so on, because the word Al means power. In the English parlance, in the English language, you would say almighty. That's a word that any religious person can adopt. So that's what the name El conveys. In fact, in the Bible, you have Moses being told in Exodus chapter 7, verse 1, that he will be an Elohim to Pharaoh, and Aaron will be your prophet. And in Exodus 21 and 22, judges are given that name. So the word El conveys power. That's why, my friends, in Genesis chapter 1, the name Elohim is used exclusively, no other name of God. The tetragrammaton is unique, and that only applies to the God of Israel. Now, think about this for a moment. Would it strike you as odd that other religions might borrow from Judaism? Think about that. Look around you. As it turns out, more than half the world's population believes that the Hebrew Bible is holy. Well, that's strange, right? So I granted that people in history borrowed from Judaism, and I don't know what country you're from, but wherever it is, I'm fairly certain that the people around you are misappropriating ideas that were originally found in the Jewish faith. Now, it is true that there are two views here, and you might want to consider them. One view is the Jewish view, and that is that we brought monotheism to the world, and other religions then adopted, or that everyone was just believing in many, many gods, and some tribe of the Jews came up with the idea of monotheism, and that stuck. But we see relics of it in the ancient world. I would posit to you that the ancient world was not very different than our current world. People borrowed from the Jewish people, like today, also yesterday, and that's why you find those variances. That's all. That shouldn't persuade anyone. I mean, we're living in a time when people believe in literally more than half the world believes that the 5 books of Moses are the word of God. Literally, I would think that's rather striking, don't you? Half of the world. And that's predicted in Deuteronomy chapter 4. So if you can see that people are borrowing from the Jews everywhere, and there are, of course, layers. You have Pauline Christianity, the Catholic Church, another accretion, the split of the church, the Reformation, 19th century Mormonism, another accretion, but they're all borrowing from the Jews. So this isn't difficult to work this one out, to tease this all out. This is not complicated.
Thank you for answering that. You know, me and you have different conclusions on this one. I appreciate the super chatter, though. Aubrey Van Zil again is back. Paul, correct. God's plan of how he will save is prophesied to be a mystery. Isaiah 53:1. Who has believed our message, and to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed?
Who's speaking there? I just ask you that. And remember what I told you, my brothers and sisters. If you have no plans on reading the passages that introduce Isaiah 53, there is no way you're going to leave the church. There's no chance. Don't even try. Read just one verse earlier. So you're right, 53 verse 1, there's a question being asked by those who are stunned. In Hebrew, mi hemen l'shmu asenu uzrei Hashem al mi negusa. Who would have believed our report, and look to whom the arm of the Lord has been revealed? Well, who's asking that question? All you need to do is take one step back, just one step back. Kain yazek goyim rabim, alav yikbetsu malachim pm. Solely cast down my nations. Kings will shut their mouths because of him. So who's speaking here? The kings of nations. They're shocked. Why? Because what was not told to them, Ra'u, they'll see, and what they had never heard, his Boinenu, they will finally understand. Ignore the chapter break from Isaiah 52 to 53, because the only reason that chapter break is there is who is speaking. In 52:13 through 15, God is speaking, and now the Gentile kings of nations are speaking in their numbed astonishment. But I say it to everyone, there's nothing fancy going on here. I don't have manuscripts in my sleeves that you don't have access. Paul made that claim. Paul, in Ephesians chapter 3, is claiming that he has access to revelation that no one else does. Please read the first 5 passages of Ephesians 3. He's making that claim. And if you think, well, I'm not sure if Paul wrote Ephesians or not, see 1 Corinthians chapter 2. That's the claim. I have access. Wait, I have unique revelation that no one else has, and I didn't get it from Jerusalem, the first 2 chapters of Galatians. Why? What about Isaiah 53? If Isaiah 53 is that, then what do you mean I have a unique revelation? Paul didn't care about any of that stuff. Paul is saying that he has unique revelation, and the so-called pillars of the church don't. He doesn't get it from man. He doesn't get it from Jerusalem. That is why Paul says that I didn't go to Jerusalem in Galatians 1, verse 17. I went to Arabia. Why is Paul going to Arabia? Why is he talking about going to it? Was Paul going to on a Hajj to Mecca? No. His point is, I didn't have to rely on Jerusalem. And that, my friends, is why that whenever you see a divergence between the book of Acts and Paul's own letters, you will consistently find that the book of Acts is placing Paul in Jerusalem much more frequently than Paul is. Why? Because Paul wants to show that he's not reliant on Jerusalem. How do you know? Read the first 2 chapters of Galatians. All this stuff is all plain. Good question. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Next one is truth exclusive. Christ took curse of law for us, so he paid to the law. Tovia will be judged by law without Messiah, death, resurrection. No temple exists for you. Pray.
That's a very good question. I don't know. Right. That's the best answer. Jesus paid the price for me. But people don't realize what they're saying when they're expressing what Paul says is paid the price. If you're saying that Jesus paid the price for me, now you have to listen very carefully or you'll miss this point. Then you are saying that Christianity's God is not a God of love and mercy. People don't get this point. This is so transparent. Exactly. In the Christian model, God the Father cannot forgive you if you renounce your sin and confess, as we find in 1 Kings 8:46-50. Someone's got to pay the price. So if you're arrested and you go before the judge and the judge is set to send you to prison or you have to pay a fine, in Christianity, if someone walks up to you and says, I'm a rich guy, here's my credit card, you can pay, I'll pay the fine for you, right? And the judge says, we'll take that. I don't care where the money comes from as long as it's not illicit. That's the God of Christianity. That judge is not merciful. That judge rather is accepting someone else's payment as a ransom for you. Mark chapter 10 verse 45, Matthew chapter 20 verse 28. I mean, to hammer this in the Jewish faith, if someone stands before God and says, I confess what I did, please read 1 Kings 8:46. King Solomon is speaking here. I confess my sins in heaven. I regret what I did. I am sorry what I did. God will say, I forgive you. Your sins will not be remembered against you. Ezekiel chapter 18, verse 21-23. So I know I'm going to offend many Christians here. I really am sorry. I don't wish to. But in fact, when you say someone has to pay the price, what you're saying is that God can't just forgive you if you regret what you do. And this element that the Father is inaccessible is the stench of this is all over Christian literature. You're a sinner. Guys, if what I'm saying to you sounds weird, odd, that means you've never been a Christian in your life. This is standard Sunday service, that you're a sinner, you're lost, God can't look at you, he's perfect, he's righteous, you're a sinner, someone's got to pay the price. Well, if someone's paying a price for you, then where's the mercy? So although Christianity uses terms like God is love all the time, God is merciful all the time, this is why Christians are going to really, I hope they won't hate me too much saying, and I know you won it straight, you're misappropriating beautiful words like love and mercy. Because if you say pay the price, that means there's no love and mercy here. It's just you're using someone else's credit card if you just buy in. That's why Judaism is saying, no, that's not merciful. Someone pays the price. What is merciful is the judge, rather, who you stand before, sees your heart. And when you say, I confess what I did, I regret what I did, the judge says to you, I forgive you, go home. Now we're talking Judaism. So thank you for that point.
Thank you so much. Aubrey Zil says Jews prophesied to only recognize Messiah when he returns to defend Jerusalem, Zechariah 12:10. They will look on me whom they have pierced, and they will mourn for him as one mourns for an only son.
Great question. What's the question? I strongly encourage you to read it in context. Zechariah 12 is talking about the restoration of the Jewish people to Jerusalem at the end of days, and nations will attack Jerusalem, attack the Jewish people over the status of Jerusalem. And we are told there, V'hoya b'yoyim hahu, and please, you quoted Zechariah 12:10. Great. Read it in context. V'hoya b'yoyim hahu avakesh lahashmin es kol hagoyim haboim al Yerushalayim. That's Zechariah 12:9. It'll be in those days, avakesh lahashmin es kol hagoyim haboim al Yerushalayim, that I will destroy all the nations that come against Jerusalem. So the Jews are restored back to Jerusalem, and then the Hebitu Elai et asher dakaru, they will look to me because of the one who was killed, or those who killed. Dakaru is the plural, and will repent, will return back to God. Was that October 7th? I don't know, but it means a catastrophic blow to the Jews that causes them to repent. one other caveat here. The book of John sharply disagrees with your exposition of the text, and I'd encourage you to look that up. The fourth gospel claims, this is going to blow your mind away, and I hope you're paying attention. I really hope that you, the viewer, looks this up for yourself. Like, don't trust me. Look it up for yourself. As it turns out, the book of John, the fourth gospel, quotes Zechariah chapter 12, the very passage you described. But as it turns out, John, talk about misappropriating the text, please look up right now. Open up a browser, John chapter 19, verse 37. Context: Roman soldiers pierce the side of Jesus, post-mortem inspection to see if he's really dead. They don't know if they have to break his legs. It's a unique story that's only found in the book of John, because John wants Jesus to be the Lamb of God. And those of who are watching this know that it's true. And therefore, and he says, and John 19:37, please look it up now. Open up two browsers. In one browser, open up Zechariah 12:10. In the other browser, open up John 19:37. Use your computer. Okay, this is not sleight of hand. John actually changes the pronoun. In John 19:37, it doesn't say look to me, but rather they will look upon him whom they have pierced. And who pierced? The Roman soldiers, not even the Jews. And it's a post-mortem inspection. It's not a crucifixion. Do you get that point? In John 19:37, Jesus dead already. The piercing where blood and water come out of the side of Jesus is a demonstration that he's already dead. Do you understand how this is such a misappropriation of text? And as it turns out, this doesn't seem to frighten Christian commentaries, where the Christian commentators routinely, MacArthur's Bible says that the Jews are going to feel terrible at the end of days and feel horrible. Wait, but John 19 says it's not even talking about Jews, it's not talking about a crucifixion. So I got Roman soldiers. Guys, it's time to just go back to the text. It's really very simple.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Jonathan Stein is back again. Thanks for the super chat. Rabbi, I'm struggling against the pull of atheism and my rational mind. Modern science is very unsettling. I want to remain a Jewish theist. Help.
Just, could you add a sentence there for me? I mean, like, what? Like, I mean, we know a lot more about the universe today than we did 2,000 and 3,000 years ago. We know things are much more complex and more amazing than we ever did. So why is that? And uniform, which means in the ancient world, monotheism made no sense. I mean, there's a reason why Judaism was very much alone in the world, where we were the only monotheism. Why? Because in the ancient world, there were just things that seemed incompatible. Fire, water, hail, it didn't mix together. What do we know now that we didn't know then? That we're all made up of the same stuff. You see that dog of yours? You share about 98% of your DNA with him. A clump of yeast on your table, about 70% of your DNA do share with that clump of yeast. We're made up of stardust, and the most plentiful element in the universe is hydrogen. Like, hello. So what we are encountering today was not known in the ancient world. In the ancient world, the forces in the world seemed highly variegated. They didn't even know what an earthquake was, and they didn't understand what a tsunami was. Now we know that it really is coming from one force. I'll say something that I don't think will offend anyone. I don't think I ever said this to anyone. I think we're living in a time where you really do have two choices. Paganism is just not tenable any longer, because we know we're just protoplasm. We know just carbon. We know what we're made of, right? So I think that today there's only two choices: either the radical monotheism that my faith espouses, or atheism. But there really is no in between. The world of Thor and Zeus and all these other gods are just untenable today. So I think the case should, I think that makes the case very well, as opposed to the ancient world. So thank you.
Yeah, and they were just asking, just to clarify, to make sure, they were saying what did they say? I'm sorry. I'm asking for his argument against atheism. So I felt like that was what you were trying to say, but.
Right. Well, I think so. What I think is the following: that we see not just the organizational world, but I just wanted to say one other thing. Judaism does not point to texts. Rather, we point to the predictive power of the Hebrew Bible, and I would encourage you to assess if you're going to be a theist or an atheist based on prophecies in the Hebrew Bible. Very specifically, keep your eye on the Jew. The Hebrew Bible tells us the Jews will send into an exile, whereas the nations will look upon the Torah and say, what a wise nation that has such law. See Deuteronomy 4, verse 12. It says you'll be spread around the world, all nations. Same chapter 4, verse 27. And you'll remain few in number. Same passage, yet you'll return. You know, there was a physicist in the early 20th century that made some astonishing claims. And it was the predictive power of what Einstein had said would happen in observation that was so shocking. I don't remember, Derek, how long ago this was, but it was just a few years ago where scientists thought they had measured something that was moving faster than the speed of light. In Einstein's view, that would have been impossible. That matter could move faster than the speed of light. And scientists around the world were very skeptical about it. Why? Because Einstein had proven himself that his predictive power is something that was just inconceivable. And later on, they found out the test was flawed. That's really what the Jewish faith is saying. We say, look at the text and look at history. And that's why the Jews are the witnesses to the world. Isaiah 43, verse 10, Atem Eidai Noshem, Avdei Shabacharti. The Jew is the witness to the world. And conversely, our unique relationship with the Torah is that we bear testimony to the Torah, and the Torah bears testimony to the Jew. So I just say, keep your eye on the Jew. Whoever wrote that book, God, men, how is it doing? What are those predictions like? Thank you for your question.
Thank you for the super chat and your answers. I'm going to read 3 at once because they're almost the same thing. And this goes back to the idea of Judaism coming first, as you pointed out, that many people copied or borrowed from Judaism. I know that you and me would disagree on this in terms of how we view Judaism, its origins.
That's wrong. You should not be disagreeing with me. And
listen, you know, if
it's
we
just
were
wrong.
married,
it's not how I raised you at all. I want your mom on the phone right now.
You know, my mom loves you. So
your mom is a good judge of character. Your mom knows what she's doing. Listen to that woman. Okay.
I'm going to read 3 in a row, and thank you for all the super chats tonight, the love, the support, the respect, even with the disagreements with anything that's being said. Thank you. Humanist Reformation. Zoroastrians brought monotheism to the world. Canaanites were captured in Babylon, learned monotheism, and became Israel. Cyrus was a huge Zoroastrian. The next one is by Jonathan Stein. Was Judaism or Zoroastrianism first? Thanks. And then Robert Winters. Wasn't Zoroastrianism a rival monotheism maybe before Judaism? Did Zoroastrianism influence or even help create Judaism through King Cyrus? Thank you for all 3 of those.
I sometimes I'm bewildered by this point. Zoroastrianism is it's not all right. One point, that is that it's not clear when exactly Zoroastrianism began. It's a ancient Persian religion, but it's highly dualistic. So I don't know why people please don't be offended. I was about to say regurgitate that, but I realize that it's probably going to sound offensive. It's a dualistic religion with independent agencies of a deity of light and a deity of darkness. That's exactly what Judaism is not. Now, ultimately, there is one agent that defeats the other. In Judaism, there is no other independent agency, and Satan was created by God. See Isaiah 45, verse 7, which means the reason why there's darkness in the world, the reason why there's there's an evil inclination is so that there could be free will. Remember the chapter we talked about last week? Before you, I have placed life and good, death and evil. Deuteronomy chapter 30, verse 15. Remember the verse before that is the one that Paul corrupts. So that is really not Zoroastrianism. Zoroastrianism is a quintessential dualistic religion. Now, Cyrus, we don't know what Cyrus's religion was, but he is assigned in Isaiah 44, verse 20, and 45, verse 1, um, so that he is the one who will tell the Jews to return back to Jerusalem and rebuild the temple. Cyrus did not believe in the God of Israel. How do you know? He probably was a Zoroastrian. We have no way of knowing. I mean, there's nothing in the text that would say that, but it actually says in Isaiah 45 that he doesn't know my name. My brothers and sisters, the point, one of the massive points of Isaiah 45 is God is predicting that a Persian king is going to tell the Jews to go back to Jerusalem and rebuild the temple, right? The point of the chapter is that this man, who the book of Isaiah identifies as I'm anointing him for this mandate, he doesn't know my name. That means he's not a follower of me. And don't question me. Like, why would you use him? Why would you use that person? Why would you use that odd leader in history? Why would you use Oskar Schindler? Who was Oskar Schindler? He was a German Roman Catholic who was a profiteer and a womanizer who somehow found his way and saved more than 1,000 Jews during the Holocaust. Oskar Schindler? Like, that's who God used? Yeah. Why? I don't know. But you have these unusual figures in history that just step into history and make a difference. So the whole point of Isaiah 45 is, I will use people you don't expect. They don't know my name, and I'm using them anyway, and my ways are straight. And at the end of time, you'll ultimately understand why my plan is just. That's the whole point of it. Thank you for your questions.
Thank you for the Zoroastrian questions. And obviously, admittedly, right, we all have our bias, we all have our perspective, and you are coming from Orthodox Judaism. And I know that a lot of the critical scholars will come at it from different angles and they have different ideas. And I don't think any of them are thinking in the dualistic sense, but you do rightly point out the difference there. I think oftentimes they're highlighting other aspects that they think are being influential on Jewish minds, Jewish thought within Judaism, like resurrection or other things. But that's a whole nother rabbit trail discussion that is off the topic of this, because you can also see elements of that in, Egyptian mythology or in Egyptian ideas, and they change over time. But anyway, I'm moving to the next couple here. We have a few more, if that's okay with you, Rabbi.
Mm-hmm.
It's okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
This is a very big topic, what Derek just spoke about. Hope you're paying attention to him, because these are really two narratives that are competing with each other. Is monotheism first, and then it becomes it is betrayed, but there's a remnant that maintains it? Or is paganism the original, and then there is in a later iteration, or better, a mutation which produces Judaism? These are two competing forces. These are two worldviews that are clashing. What happened here? Monotheism first, and then a betrayal of that, or paganism and then a mutation of paganism? It's exactly correct, Derek. You lined that up perfectly.
Thank you. The Gypsy Prince. Did Paul get the Eucharist through revelation, or could this be the words of a Jewish rabbi?
No, this is 1 Corinthians 11. No, don't eat body and blood. No. So that the Eucharist is
You're smiling, Rabbi. You're smiling.
It's so crazy, guys. I love you guys, but like eating body and drinking blood, So Paul almost never quotes Jesus. Almost never. I say almost because this is an exception. 1 Corinthians 11. where we have the Eucharist that we find in the Gospels as well, and the Passover Seder in the Synoptic Gospels a day before in the book of John. And but regardless, that's ritual cannibalism. The idea is that if you ate from the gods, you would take on the powers of the gods, infuse with those powers, and you'd be able to do what the gods do. So when does that occur? It depends on the book. Does it occur on the first Easter Sunday, as John would have us believe, where Jesus breathes on the disciples, tells them they can forgive sin, which is mind-blowing because Christians frequently say that forgiving sin is a prerogative only for deity, but here we see that that's not the view of the author of the book. John, did it happen in Pentecost? This is ritual cannibalism. I'm not trying to mock Christian, but that's what it is. It's you eat. I lived in a country and I served as the rabbi of a country that had cannibals in it. So in Indonesia, on the island of Papua, which the western part is Indonesia, there are tribes that still practice cannibalism to this day. And they're not engaging in cannibalism for nutritious reasons because they prefer the taste of human flesh. Cannibalism is practiced because by those who believe that if you eat from the body of your victim, you gain the properties of the body you ate and the blood you drank. And that's what comes into view in 1 Corinthians. Could anything be more vile? Could anything be more vulgar? And in the Hebrew Bible, human sacrifice is attacked constantly. And why did the ancient world want to deliberately sacrifice babies and virgins in Central America and in the Middle East? Because what do babies represent? Innocent, sinless, virgins, sinless, innocent. The Aztecs practiced this. It is detestable. And the Hebrew Bible opposes this. So what would possess someone to look at 1 Corinthians 11 and think, yes, this is a good idea? It's not that this idea is not found in the Hebrew Bible. It's that it is opposed by the prophets of Israel. There's not the human sacrifice in the view of the Torah is the motherlode of bad ideas. Thank you for your question.
If I may add to that, because the questioner was asking, did Paul get this by revelation? I think that's what Paul says.
He didn't get it from Judaism. Paul is claiming that he has everything from revelation. And Paul is claiming that, Paul, of course, I don't even believe that Paul, I know scholars disagree about that. I don't believe that Paul had a non-veridical experience, that he misidentified. He was a charlatan. He was a Joseph Smith character. And he was simply taking ideas that were all around the Levant and well beyond and infusing them into the religion he was producing. Joseph Smith is from the modern era. Paul was a Joseph Smith character. This is not a guy who was just meditating too much and didn't have enough protein in his diet to think straight. This is a person who very plotted this out very carefully, synchronizing ideas that were very well known and very attractive with Judaism, also well known and attractive, and producing the religion is Christianity. He produces the Orthodoxy. Crazy, crazy thing. People don't notice this. I don't think people do, but Paul's ideas are so strong that they even mutate past the Synoptic Gospels, like Jesus being the Lamb of God. Jesus is our Passover. So that's in 1 Corinthians 5:7. But you don't find in the Synoptic Gospels that, bing, it shows up in the book of John. Jesus being divine in the Carmen Christi in Philippians chapter 2, verse 6 through 11. You don't find that in the Synoptic Gospel. Bang, there it is in the prologue. The cancer that Paul infuses metastasizes and will jump over everything and find its way into the proto-orthodoxy of the church that now assaults the Jewish faith. Good question.
Thank you so much for the super chat there. Victor Engelman, in Adversus Judaeus, Augustine of Hippo already mentions that Jews interpret passages as referring to them, not to Jesus. So that debate is not new. So I think Victor's just coming in line with what you were saying earlier, that Jews did not ever understand this the way that
I'll go further with you. I'll go crazy with you. I'll go nutsy kooky with you. And I talk about this in my book, Volume 1, Biblical. Probably the smartest church father was Origen, a 3rd century church father. He was a really bright fellow. And he wrote a reply to a 2nd century opponent of Christianity, Celsus.
Mm-hmm.
And a very sophisticated pagan who detested Christianity. So nothing of the 2nd century philosopher survives. Nothing of his survives. But it does survive through Origen's reply to him. Origen methodically lines out everything that he said against Christianity. He responds to it, and it survives. And strikingly, in that work, Origen is writing this 3rd century, and he's saying that I met many Jewish people and asked them about Isaiah 53, and they responded. Isaiah 53 is speaking about Israel as a single individual. He says that. He admits that. You're not going to get that from Jews for Jesus, but you will get it from a 3rd century church father whose influence on the church is very striking. So, yes, very well done. Exactly, Augustine, all that. Right.
Thank you. Hang Fashi says, why would Yahweh give a prohibition against consuming shellfish and then put microscopic shrimp in drinking water? Leviticus 11:12.
Okay, so there's a prohibition against eating anything that has any fish that has fins and scales, but there's no prohibition against eating something that you can't see, that's invisible. In fact, that's where Jewish law separates it. If you can't see it, it doesn't exist. So that's you are very much understanding the Talmud, which I don't bring in, and that is, if you can't see it, it isn't there. It has to be visible. Look at the text of Leviticus 11. Right.
Thank you. Last one, and thank you everybody for the support. We're going to let Rabbi go after this one. Humanist Reformation, thank you so much. Zoroastrianism is not dualistic. Encyclopedias call it monotheistic, and so do scholars. There is one creator God, Ahura Mazda, with a lesser evil spirit. Judaism is dualistic under the rabbi's definition with Hasatan. I think that's what the additional H next to with is. So,
the oldest book in the Hebrew Bible is the book of Job. Right? Job is righteous. He wasn't even keeping laws. He was a ben Noach. Right? Open the book of Job. It is a good thing that Satan is mentioned rarely in the Hebrew Bible. It's a good thing because there are just so few passages about it that we can easily figure out if Satan is an independent agent or is a complete servant of God. Okay? Satan stands before God in the whole assembly of angels and speaks about this fellow Job, who was righteous, and Satan says to God that perhaps this person is righteous because, after all, he was blessed with a large family and enormous wealth, and if perhaps these blessings were taken away from him, perhaps he would curse God. That's how the book opens. It's one of the rare introductions to Satan. There are other places, but it's extremely rare. And God tells Satan, okay, this is what you can do to Job, and this is what is forbidden for you to do to Job. You can't take his life. And is Job pressed to the edge? Yeah. Does he curse the womb in which he was conceived? Yeah. Does he receive the most foolish advice from his wife and his companions? Constantly. But ultimately, Job is able to resist Satan's blandishments. And the key point is that Satan is not evil as it is in Zoroastrianism. It's not an opponent of God as it is in Zoroastrianism. It's not an opponent of God as it is in the book of Revelation and 2 Thessalonians. It's really all over the Christian Bible. That's highly dualistic. So definition of dualism is the following: that the devil or Satan really is an independent agent. It really is a chief enemy and blasphemer of God. That's how Satan is viewed in Christianity. That can't be. God created evil, Isaiah 45, verse 7. Now, in in the Zoroastrian view, does ultimately the God of light win? Yes, but that doesn't absolve it of its polytheism or its dualism. The reason why we are living in a time when religions that are not monotheistic are reassigning themselves as monotheistic, Hindus do this as well. If there's a Hindu here, I really don't want to offend you, but you're going to routinely hear Hindus saying that we're the oldest monotheism in the world. And I heard this a lot in Indonesia. I heard this a lot in Bali. I lectured at a college in Bali. Believe it or not, there are colleges there. Where one Hindu went at it with me and said, no, we're Hindus. We're the oldest monotheism in the world. Why is this happening? Why are these religions suddenly identifying themselves as monotheistic? Because what we talked about earlier, we know the science. You can either be in a theist or a deist or an atheist. The pagan world of many gods is just untenable. Why? Because we know the science, right? So what we're having now is religions that were always known to be dualistic, therefore pagan, are reinterpreting themselves or redefining themselves as monotheistic. Why? Because we know we have a microscope. We know the deal. We know that the dualism is untenable. And although things look like they're inconsistent or incompatible with each other, we know everything is synchronizing with each other. My gosh, we are made up of stardust. That's what we're made of. So, bingo, that's why we're finding that religions like Zoroastrianism, like Hinduism, are now claiming monotheism. I understand that. And if you're a Hindu or whatever, I don't mean to offend you, but that's what's happening because we know the science. So thank you for that question. And thank you, Derek.
Humanist Reformation, to give them, since they gave us a 20 here, they said all lesser spirits in Zoroastrianism serve Ahura Mazda, just like Satan serves God in Judaism. And then they said Zoroastrianism is not dualistic any more than Judaism. So maybe there's something I need to look into this myself as well, dig deeper into it. But I really do appreciate them super chatting and asking the question and your time, Rabbi. Are there any final words from you to our audience? I pinned your YouTube channel at the top so people can subscribe if they're interested in this. What is your YouTube channel about? What do you use it for?
What is it about? It's about biblical texts and why Judaism doesn't accept the Christian Messiah. After all, why do I do this? Why in Jerusalem it's 2:43 in the morning? Why am I doing this? Because I want Jews in the church to return back to the Jewish faith and help people understand about our people, our nation. We have a unique history, and keep your eye on the people of Israel. And also, I would just encourage your viewers, keep us in your prayers. This is a very unique time we're living in. And thank you, Derek, for having me on. Shalom.
Thank you so much. Everybody, hit the like button. I appreciate everybody in the chat who was respectful, regardless if you agree, disagree, like, dislike, have a disagreement on various ideas. That's what it's all here for. Not interested in always having an echo chamber, even though I don't usually do that. It's cool to have interfaith dialogue with someone like you, Tovia. You're definitely controversial among Christians. I get a lot of comments.
Come on, stop it. They know they love me.
You're one of their favorite, actually.
Seriously, people who make a living off me in the Christian world. They say, "Give me money because we have to fight Rabbi Singer." Anyways, a lot of love to you. I'm not kidding. So they make a
I believe you. I believe you. Hey, we do need to figure out some dates about a potential debate that might happen in person.
We'll talk about that. Yeah.
I'm moving in July. I'll be in Florida.
You're moving? You're going to Florida also?
Me and the family are relocating. Yep.
Okay, brilliant. All right. Oh, I'll keep that in mind. Everything will happen before then.
Cool deal.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much, everybody. Never forget, we are MythVision.